A discussion on the story of Abraham, child murder from the Hebrew Bible. Introduction. The story of Abraham and his near sacrifice of Isaac, found in Genesis 22 of the Canaanite Hebrew Bible, has been interpreted and debated for centuries. On the surface, it presents a powerful narrative of faith, obedience, and divine testing, where Abraham is willing to sacrifice his beloved son in obedience to God's command. However, when analyzed through a psychological lens, this story reveals much darker undercurrents. This paper explores the disturbing implications of Abraham's actions, positioning them within the framework of psychopathy, religious fanaticism, and moral blindness. By examining the lies Abraham tells, his manipulation of his son and others, and his willingness to sacrifice Isaac, we uncover a chilling portrait of an individual whose faith-driven behavior seems to detach him from basic human empathy and ethical considerations. This analysis questions the moral foundation of Abraham's faith and provides insight into the psychological mechanisms that may have influenced his decisions. The path to sacrifice, a bridge between ancient texts and divine command. As we journey deeper into the sacred writings of the King James Bible, we encounter one of the most profound and unsettling narratives in the Canaanite Hebrew Scriptures, the story of Abraham and Isaac. This pivotal moment, often referred to as the 𝗖𝗍𝗲, or the binding of Isaac, is framed as a profound test of faith and obedience. The events unfold within a religious and cultural framework where the divine will was believed to guide, shape, and sometimes demand the most unimaginable sacrifices. For Abraham, this test arrives as a direct command from Yahweh to sacrifice his son Isaac, an act that would seem unthinkable to most. This moment of supreme obedience is recorded in Genesis 22, and through the King James Bible, we are transported into the heart of a patriarchal faith that demanded absolute devotion, regardless of the emotional and moral costs. The tragic tension between divine command and paternal love sets the stage for a story that explores the limits of faith and the psychological toll of religious zealotry. As we delve into this narrative, we must remember that Abraham's willingness to obey the voice of Yahweh reflects a religious climate that viewed obedience to divine will above all else, even the sanctity of human life. This story, captured through the ancient text of Canaanite Hebrew and preserved in the King James Version, speaks to us of the complex interplay between faith, sacrifice, and morality. King James Bible Version, a linguistic bridge between Canaanite Hebrew and Greek. And it came to pass after these things, that God did tempt Abraham, and said unto him, Abraham. And he said, Behold, here I am. And he said, Take now thy son, thine only son Isaac, whom thou lovest, and get thee into the land of Moriah, and offer him there for a burnt offering upon one of the mountains, which I will tell thee of. And Abraham rose up early in the morning, and saddled his ass, and took two of his young men with him, and Isaac his son, and clave the wood for the burnt offering, and rose up, and went unto the place of which God had told him. Then on the third day Abraham lifted up his eyes, and saw the place afar off. And Abraham said unto his young men, Abide ye here with the ass, and I and the lad will go yonder and worship, and come again to you. And Abraham took the wood of the burnt offering, and laid it upon Isaac his son, and he took the fire in his hand, and a knife, and they went both of them together. And Isaac spake unto Abraham his father, and said, My father. And he said, Here am I, my son. And he said, Behold the fire and the wood, but where is the lamb for a burnt offering? And Abraham said, My son, God will provide himself a lamb for a burnt offering. So they went both of them together. And they came to the place which God had told him of, and Abraham built an altar there, and laid the wood in order, and bound Isaac his son, and laid him on the altar upon the wood. And Abraham stretched forth his hand, and took the knife to slay his son. And the angel of the Lord called unto him out of heaven, and said, Abraham, Abraham. And he said, Here am I. And he said, Lay not thine hand upon the lad, neither do thou anything unto him, for now I know that thou fearest God, seeing thou hast not withheld thy son, thine only son from me. And Abraham lifted up his eyes, and looked. And behold, behind him a ram caught in a thicket by his horns. And Abraham went, and took the ram, and offered him up for a burnt offering in the stead of his son. And Abraham called the name of that place 𝗧𝗿𝗲𝗍𝗃, as it is said to this day, In the mount of the Lord it shall be seen. And the angel of the Lord called unto Abraham out of heaven the second time, and said, By myself have I sworn, saith the Lord, for because thou hast done this thing, and hast not withheld thy son, thine only son, that in blessing I will bless thee, and in multiplying I will multiply thy seed as the stars of the heaven, and as the sand which is upon the seashore. And thy seed shall possess the gate of his enemies, and in thy seed shall all the nations of the earth be blessed, because thou hast obeyed my voice. So Abraham returned unto his young men, and they rose up, and went together to Beersheba. And Abraham dwelt at Beersheba, which God Isaac was being sacrificed to. In the Bible, Abraham's near sacrifice of Isaac is understood to be an act of obedience to the God of Israel, who is revealed to Abraham as the one true God. The text specifically says God commanded Abraham to sacrifice Isaac, Genesis 20:1. And this God is the 𝗖𝗆𝗱𝗏, Jehovah, worshipped by the Israelites, psychopathic mindset, and willingness to kill a child. In this scenario, Abraham can be seen as an individual who is so consumed by his belief system and commitment to a higher power, in this case, 𝗖𝗆𝗱, that he is willing to sacrifice his own child without hesitation, without any regard for the child's well-being or future. His psychopathy is reflected in his extreme lack of empathy and distorted moral compass, where his commitment to the divine command overrides his inherent love for his son, Isaac. This is a hallmark of fanaticism, an individual who is willing to dehumanize those closest to them in pursuit of an abstract ideal or an external directive. The psychopath is typically indifferent to the emotional or physical pain they cause to others, as their internal belief or goal justifies the means, no matter how horrific. Lies Abraham tells Isaac, likely a young boy around 8 to 16 years old, questions his father as they prepare for the sacrifice. Behold the fire and the wood, but where is the lamb for a burnt offering? Genesis 22:7. Abraham's response, God will provide himself a lamb for a burnt offering, is a deceptive statement designed to calm Isaac's suspicions and conceal the horrific truth that Isaac is the intended sacrifice. This lie not only serves to placate Isaac, but also acts as a psychological manipulation, distracting him from the growing fear he must be feeling as they ascend the mountain together. The lie feeds Isaac's trust in his father while hiding the grim reality of the situation. Similarly, when Abraham tells the two servants accompanying him, Abide ye here with the ass, and I and the lad will go yonder and worship, and come again to you, Genesis 20:5, he lies to them as well, assuring them that both he and Isaac will return. In reality, Abraham knows Isaac will not be coming back alive. This statement is not only deceptive, but also a cold-hearted manipulation, meant to prevent any interference with his grim mission and further revealing Abraham's single-minded determination to carry out the sacrifice without interruption. After carrying out the act, Abraham would need to continue the web of lies. By telling the servants that Isaac would return with him, he essentially sets the stage for a continued deception. The chilling implication is that, in the aftermath, Abraham would have to account for Isaac's absence. He would either have to fabricate a story or omit crucial details, further entrenching the lie. But the liars would not stop there. Abraham would have to explain Isaac's disappearance to Sarah, Isaac's mother, the rest of his family, and the surrounding community. He would likely have to invent a plausible explanation for Isaac's absence, either crafting a story about an accident or simply hiding the truth of the sacrifice altogether. This pattern of deception reveals a disturbing aspect of Abraham's character, the ability to psychologically detach from the gravity of his actions. The lies go beyond mere deceit. They speak to the internal conflict within Abraham, who has convinced himself that his actions are justified by obedient faith to Yahweh, even at the cost of betraying and deceiving his family and community. Abraham's relentless focus on fulfilling what he believes is the divine will overrides any moral or emotional consideration of what he has done. His repeated lies, the deception of his son, the servants, his wife, and the community, reflect a profound detachment from the human cost of his actions. In this way, Abraham becomes a figure whose faith, taken to its extreme, leads him to betray the very relationships and moral values that would normally ground his decisions. His ability to lie repeatedly, even in the face of such a horrific act, demonstrates the power of blind obedience and its ability to override the basic moral instinct that would otherwise prevent a father from sacrificing his child. The psychological cost of this detachment is profound, yet Abraham's focus on fulfilling what he believes is Yahweh's will keeps him from acknowledging the emotional and moral consequences of his actions, and his lies serve to shield him from the weight of the age of Isaac. While the Bible does not provide an explicit age for Isaac at this moment, traditional interpretations generally place him at around 8 to 16 years old. Based on the way the story is told and other contextual clues, Isaac carries the wood for the offering. Genesis 22:6, which suggests that he is strong enough to bear the burden, implying that he is not an infant, but a youth capable of understanding the events around him. Psychopaths in these scenarios often take advantage of the trust placed in them by their children. Abraham's treatment of Isaac, the lies, and his manipulation of the situation are all indicative of someone who is emotionally detached from the reality of what is happening. Carrying the wood, Isaac's path to sacrifice. In Genesis 22:6, Abraham makes Isaac carry the very wood that will be used to burn his dead body in the sacrifice. This act is deeply symbolic, as it not only highlights Isaac's innocence and obedience, but also deepens the emotional weight of the situation. Isaac, likely confused and terrified, carries the wood up the mountain while his father walks alongside him, holding the fire and knife, the tools of execution. This detail emphasizes the brutality of Abraham's actions, as he forces his son to bear the physical burden that will ultimately be used to burn his own flesh. By having Isaac carry the wood, Abraham reinforces the inescapable truth of what is about to happen, forcing both of them to confront the reality of the sacrifice without openly acknowledging it. It also casts a shadow over the father-son relationship, as Abraham knowingly places his son in a position that makes it almost impossible for Isaac to avoid understanding that he is being led to his own death. This moment of psychological torment for Isaac is amplified by the physical labor he is required to perform, carrying the instrument of his own destruction, while Abraham's silence and deception heighten the sense of dread and betrayal. The plan to kill and burn Isaac. From a psychopathic perspective, the intended act of violence is not done out of compassion, but rather as a misguided expression of devotion to his belief system. The knife and fire are tools to murder and destroy Isaac, with the ultimate intention to burn his child's body on an altar. The knife represents the cold, calculated preparation for violence. Abraham plans to stab his son in the chest or throat, an act that would require him to physically overpower Isaac, a moment that might involve struggling with a terrified child. The burning that Abraham prepares for afterward signifies the finality of the act. Burning a body would not only be a method of ritual sacrifice, but also a way to erase the child's humanity, reducing him to nothing more than an offering to Yahweh. This reflects the mindset of a psychopath who, though capable of deep emotion and belief, is ultimately willing to reduce a loved one to an object, in this case, a burnt offering for his God. The willingness to kill, Abraham's act of devotion to Yahweh, Abraham's willingness to bind Isaac and lay him on the altar, preparing to slay his own son with a knife. Genesis 20:9-10 represents the extreme depths of obedience and faith he had toward Yahweh, his God. The mental state required to carry out such an act would have been one of intense devotion, but also psychological turmoil. Abraham, believing that Yahweh had commanded the sacrifice of his son, was prepared to follow through without hesitation, trusting that his obedience would fulfill the will of the divine. In that moment, Abraham's focus would have been entirely on fulfilling what he perceived as a sacred obligation, despite the horrifying nature of the task. This act is not just one of obedience, but also of ultimate surrender. Abraham was willing to sacrifice his son, because he believed it was demanded by Yahweh. The mental frame necessary to carry out such a gruesome task has a profound disconnection from the natural bond between father and child, driven by the belief in divine command above all else. In that moment, Abraham's actions represent the extreme extent to which faith can consume the human mind, willing a man to commit the unthinkable in the name of obedience to God. Psychological profile of Abraham as a fanatic psychopath. A fanatical psychopath in this scenario is someone whose personal identity is so deeply intertwined with their religious or ideological beliefs that they view any form of disobedience or hesitation as a betrayal of their ultimate goal. For such a person, Isaac is not a beloved son, but rather a tool to fulfill the perceived divine will. His life becomes secondary to the overarching mission, and natural empathy or affection is suppressed in favor of blind devotion. While Abraham may have had some affection for Isaac, his love is ultimately subordinated to his overwhelming desire for divine approval and the preservation of his own belief system. In this warped mindset, cruelty is justified as an act of faith, with the sacrifice seen not as murder, but as worship. Abraham might even convince himself that he is doing Isaac a favor by fulfilling a divine command that will ensure blessings for his son's future. To protect himself from the psychological weight of his actions, Abraham deludes both himself and those around him, using lies and deception to mask the horrific reality of what he's about to do. In his mind, the act is not one of violence, but of sacrifice. The illusion of religious devotion is maintained through these layers of self-deception and manipulation, allowing Abraham to continue on his path without confronting the moral and emotional consequences of his actions. What would happen to Abraham today, in modern society, if someone attempted to kill their child? It would almost certainly lead to immediate arrest for attempted murder, with additional charges of child abuse, endangerment, and murder if the child were killed. If the child's body were discarded, the perpetrator could also face charges of interfering with a corpse or tampering with evidence. Abraham would likely undergo psychological evaluation, potentially being diagnosed with severe psychopathy, delusional disorder, or religious fanaticism. His ability to rationalize murder would indicate profound psychotic tendencies, showing a detachment from the consequences of his actions. Depending on the jurisdiction and the outcome of the crime, he could face life imprisonment or the death penalty if Isaac did not survive. Beyond the legal consequences, there would be widespread social outrage. Abraham would be seen as a dangerous fanatic, whose mental instability led him to harm his own child, and his actions would be universally condemned. Public horror and disgust would surround the crime, particularly the deception involved, as Abraham would likely have to fabricate a story and cover up the evidence of his crime. The brutality of his actions and the deceptive efforts to avoid detection would amplify the societal rejection, prompting serious concerns about the dangers posed by individuals who justify extreme violence in the name of belief. If Abraham were experiencing visual and auditory hallucinations, he could potentially be diagnosed with schizophrenia or a related psychotic disorder. Depending on the nature and context of his hallucinations, Schizophrenia is often characterized by delusions, hallucinations, and disorganized thinking, which significantly impact a person's perception of reality. In Abraham's case, hearing a voice that he believes to be Yahweh commanding him to sacrifice Isaac and possibly seeing other signs could qualify as auditory and visual hallucinations. Along with these hallucinations, Abraham would likely experience delusions, such as the false belief that he is fulfilling a divine command. This could point to religious delusions, where the person believes they have a special role in carrying out what they perceive as a divine will. Schizophrenia and similar disorders involve a break from reality, which could explain Abraham's willingness to carry out such a horrific act without apparent remorse, as he may truly believe his actions are righteous. While schizophrenia is one possible diagnosis, other conditions like delusional disorder, bipolar disorder during manic episodes, or extreme religious fanaticism could also lead to similar behavior, where reality is interpreted through a skewed lens. In modern psychological terms, Abraham's behavior, if driven by hallucinations and delusions, could be interpreted as the result of a psychotic disorder, though his deep religious convictions might blur the line between mental illness and extreme devotion, complicating a definitive diagnosis. Faith and the Dark Tetrad, Abraham's descent into moral blindness. The Dark Tetrad refers to a set of 4 personality traits: narcissism, Machiavellianism, psychopathy, and sadism, which collectively represent a particularly toxic combination of traits linked to manipulative, callous, and harmful behavior. In the context of Abraham and his belief system, elements of the Dark Tetrad can be observed in his willingness to sacrifice his son Isaac in response to what he believes is a divine command. Narcissism might manifest in Abraham's absolute devotion to fulfilling what he perceives as God's will, viewing his actions as central to his own identity and spiritual mission, irrespective of the emotional and moral devastation it causes to those around him. Machiavellianism is reflected in his calculated manipulation of both Isaac and the servants, using deceit and psychological tactics to ensure that no one interferes with his mission, even at the cost of betraying the trust of his own family. Abraham's ability to rationalize the psychopathic act of almost killing his son, detached from empathy and moral consideration, could be seen as an example of psychopathy, as he suppresses his natural affection for Isaac in favor of a higher, often ruthless, goal. Finally, the act of binding and preparing to kill Isaac for a religious cause could be seen as an expression of sadism, where the potential for suffering is not only accepted but justified as a necessary part of the divine plan, allowing Abraham to derive a sense of purpose from inflicting extreme harm for a perceived greater good. Abraham's adherence to his belief system, despite the grave personal and moral costs, illustrates how the Dark Tetrad traits could be integrated into a religious worldview, where blind devotion and ruthless determination override empathy and ethical considerations. Conclusion: when viewed through a modern psychological perspective, the actions of Abraham in the near sacrifice of Isaac present a stark example of fanaticism and moral detachment. Abraham's willingness to lie to his son, deceive his servants, and prepare to kill Isaac in the name of fulfilling divine will, reflective of a deeply disturbed mindset, possibly driven by psychopathy, delusion, or religious fanaticism. While he may have believed his actions were righteous and divinely ordained, the chilling reality is that his behavior mirrors that of a fanatical psychopath, a person whose warped belief system justifies extreme and harmful actions. In contrast to the reverence typically associated with this biblical story, a modern societal context would likely view Abraham as a dangerous fanatic, one whose psychological and moral failure would lead to his social and legal condemnation. Abraham's faith, in this case, becomes a tool of manipulation, cruelty, and moral blindness, serving as a dark reminder of the potential dangers inherent in uncritical devotion to any belief system.